spicing up, and my theory of why that is because
we are living through the separation of money and state. We are witnessing it, and one of the potential attack vectors I see really two on the horizon. One is the right to self-custody, and then the other one are the social attacks on Bitcoin mining, and of course they're using all the environmental FUD you can think of to throw anything at and hoping something sticks. So, I love how this panel, the name is open to interpretation. B is for Bitcoin, F is for, I'm going to say freedom, because Bitcoin really is freedom. And you know what? An attack on Bitcoin mining is an attack on Bitcoin. An attack on Bitcoin is an attack on freedom. I'll say that. But anyways, I want our panelists to kind of introduce themselves and kind of give a background who they are. Of course, Tone Vase needs no introduction, but how you doing, Tone?
That was very well said, actually. Thank you for the invite once again here at Mining Disrupt. Awesome event. It gives me an excuse to come to Miami, see a bunch of friends. Nico, great job. Thanks for moderating. My name is Tone Vase. I've been in the space maybe 7-8 years. Was former Wall Street, started a podcast, my own around early 2016. Prior to that was just on YouTube for other channels. Talked about everything, news, the mining industry, the finance side of Bitcoin, pretty much everything, and continue to fight for it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Nico. Thank you so much, Dennis. My name is Alan. I'm the regional sales manager for JSBit. Basically about me, I got screwed over a couple years ago when I was buying Bitcoin miners. Then JSBit said, Alan, we need someone like you who understands how to help people, how to make sure it doesn't happen to them. So here I am, helping everybody get a Bitcoin miner and make sure it gets to them, unlike me.
Matt?
Yeah, so my name is Matt Lusto. I'm the business development lead for firmware at Luxor Technologies.
Matt, could you
a little closer? Yeah. A little closer. Business development lead for firmware at Luxor Technologies. Worked in oil and gas and project management, project engineering for about 10 years. Stumbled into Bitcoin and decided I really wanted to get into the space. So started going to meetups, met the right people, got an introduction to Luxor, and the rest is history. We launched our firmware in March, but we have a number of other products that we're really excited about, whether it's hash rate derivatives or pool or ASIC brokerage as well. So a lot of different things we do.
Beautiful. So it sounds like
What was your degree? Geological engineering?
Mechanical engineering.
Okay, I did geology. Undergrad.
Yeah, rock liquor.
So this is a gut feeling, but maybe I think we might have the right people to have this discussion with. Anyways, so I'm going to start off with this. The CCP, they banned Bitcoin mining within their borders. The hash rate dropped by 50%. I believe that's a major reason as to why Bitcoin didn't hit 100K last cycle. And the hash rate decentralized in the process. It went all over the world. No top-down, no CEO telling these miners to plug themselves back in. It was the mere incentives of Bitcoin alone. But the thing is, a lot of those miners relocated to the U.S. And now, about 35 to 37% of the overall worldwide Bitcoin hash rate is in the U.S. And from a Bitcoiner's perspective, I would rather want more decentralization. Decentralization is a good thing. So does it worry you guys at all that there's such a big portion of the worldwide Bitcoin hash rate in the United States, specifically in one state, really? It's in Texas. Tone, do you want to hit that?
I'll go first. So when that happened in real time on the channel, I debated this against both Bitcoin Mechanic and Jimmy Song, where they thought it was great that China is giving up on mining and the hash rate is going to leave. And I didn't like it. I actually liked it when more than 50% of the hash rate was in China. Because to me, that does help decentralize the network, because no one really runs a node in China. No one's using Bitcoin in China. They're just mining it. Meanwhile, like all the main Bitcoin stuff is in the US, including Bitcoins themselves, which is my concern, which became even more so with this mining. Now, because it's in Texas, I am somewhat okay with it. But if it was, say, in California, I'd be very, very nervous. But there's many reasons why it wouldn't be in California. And to me, I'm not happy either. Like, I don't like it when the United States has everything. Like most of the developers are American. Most of the node runners are in the US, users. And my biggest concern with centralization is the actual Bitcoins. When people don't take custody of their Bitcoin, I can envision 1933 happening again, where government just passes a law over the weekend and confiscates the Bitcoin from American companies like Coinbase and the GBTC Bitcoin and the ETF that's coming. And some of the miners just show up and confiscate the Bitcoin and the facilities. So it's a little bit of a concern. I agree with you. I would rather have it be more decentralized, but because it's in Texas, it should be okay. If it gets bigger in Texas, it could be the main reason Texas secedes if they come after its Bitcoin mining. So I'm okay that it's in Texas.
I do agree. And, I'll even say this. You can tell that Texas is over the target based on the amount of propaganda, based on the amount of attacks that they're trying to throw at it. The New York Times came out with a hit piece, okay? They literally changed the color of the sky. And in this hit piece in the New York Times, they tried to make the case that, Bitcoin mining is somehow bad for the environment. And Pierre Richard of Riot, he came out with a video, and he literally took a CO2 meter and he put it behind the ASICs to see if these ASICs were emitting CO2. And the point that he was trying to make is like, look.
Like, if you think about an ASIC, it's just a very energy-intensive toaster, right? It's not directly emitting CO2. And then that calls into question, like,
do we really want to live in a world where the government is getting to decide how you should use energy and how you shouldn't use energy? And that's a very, 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 very scary world. And that's why I agree with you, Tone. Like, I'm glad that the mining hub is in Texas. But I'm going to pass it on to you, Matt. Does it worry you that, we have this huge portion of the hash rate in the United States, specifically in one state?
As a resident of Texas who has to do travel for business development, I very much appreciate that it's in Texas. Keeps my travel schedule down a little bit. But no, it being in Texas is the same reason it's actually not, I would say it's not bad that it's in America. The reason it's not as scary that it's in America is because while there are administrations that have been kind of tightening on different things, showing some relatively authoritarian type policies, we still have the legal mechanisms to challenge them. We still have Supreme Courts. We still have people who value freedom and freedom of expression, whether it's code, whether it's money. We still have that. We still have people like that. So having the tools to challenge policies that would threaten Bitcoin miners and how they choose to expend their energy, that's not as concerning.
that said, if there is a further slide in authoritarian, or people are less likely to fight for it, that's not good. So it kind of highlights the need for us as an industry to participate in education
And keep onboarding people who are not as informed, because while that Pierre Richard video landed with a lot of people is like, what? There were a lot of people who were just absolutely stunned and completely shocked at the idea that Bitcoin miners don't produce CO2, and it just didn't click for them that...
Dude, they tried to fact check it, bro.
Yeah, I know.
They tried to fact check. So check this out, right? So they tried to use the Twitter community note feature to fact check the Pierre Richard video, and guess what source they used for the community note? They used the New York Times. So the New York Times used their own source to so-called fact-check this video, which was insane. But hey, there's good news. The Bitcoin community rallied and downvoted that community note, and we got it removed. There was a happy ending there. But a couple of years ago, before Elon took over Twitter, I don't think that would have been possible.
It's very fair. It's very fair. Yeah. Education is pretty critical for the success of Bitcoin. That's really what it boils down to.
Absolutely. So, Alan, what about you? Does it worry you that we have 35 to 37% of the hash rate in the United States and in Texas as well?
Well, I get to have the ability to talk to miners from around the world. Literally, whoever you are, it doesn't matter. But I have seen the shift over the last year, and it's all going to Texas. And I'm going to take the same route as him. It's in Texas. I grew up there. I'm living in California. I'm sorry. But the reality is the free market will do what the free market does, and that's make sure that it makes sense to the miner there. You know, you're already seeing the movement from even Texas to places like Paraguay, Venezuela. It is going down south. So we're going to see North America and South America, which is both incredible Americas. Canada's growing as well. I would love to see some movement in, let's say, like in Africa, Europe. You know, Dubai is growing. But, you know, right now, I think it just makes sense for a lot of people. And I think that's what's the beauty about having a Bitcoin farm, is that what makes sense is where you'll be. And if you need to make the shift, you will. And just because it's in a state that, you know, it really makes us think, well, what is that state doing that makes everybody in the industry go there? And maybe other countries can replicate it and understand it as they make Bitcoin, you know, a form of currency there. So, you know, I've been to so many different farms in Texas, and I see why they're so successful. Why? Because when you go to other countries, they're not giving them the same leeway. It's not as open of a space. The energy isn't as accessible. So I think people will understand, and the market will decide what makes sense. But to ultimately answer the question you had, I don't like it. I don't like it. As much as I love Texas, raised in Dallas, I want to see it move further in different places. But as long as the miners are making the money and it making sense, they're going to do what they're going to do, because that's what Bitcoin is. It's freedom.
Of course, and they're gonna flow to where they're treated best, right? So I love what's happening in Texas. I think I do agree with Dennis and the way that he looks at it. Fighting is so important on the state level first. The current administration is openly hostile towards Bitcoin mining. They proposed a 30% tax on the mining industry. It was called the Dame tax. They've also proposed when the Biden administration released an executive order, it led the Treasury to release a report, and that report was called "The Future of Money and Payments." What was striking about that report is that in the eyes of the U.S. government currently, the future of money and payments are stablecoins and payment platforms. Bitcoin was not mentioned in that report. Fast forward a couple of months, they started talking about Bitcoin's energy usage, Bitcoin's mining's energy usage. And what I believe they're doing is they're focusing on that specifically as an attack vector, and I believe that's why they implemented this tax, right? But it makes sense. I mean, look, if the government has this privilege of being able to create money for free that everyone else has to work for, it absolutely makes sense that they would want to maintain that privilege, right? So, Tone, do you believe that, you know, this 30% tax that was proposed is truly for environmental reasons?
Well, no. Do some of them believe it's for environmental reasons? Yes. In reality, is it going to help the environment in any way? Absolutely not. So, that's one of the ways they do see Bitcoin mining as a new rising industry, and the first thing they want to do is tax it. One reason it will slow it down, and I'm sure there is lots of lobbyists that aren't liking the fact that Bitcoin mining is happening and is so strong. And also, I do think most of the government politicians are scared of Bitcoin because they don't understand it. And even some that do understand it are very, very scared of it. Man, every time we hear Brad Sherman say anything about Bitcoin, it's usually insane. So I'm not surprised that happened. It's going to be hard for them to get this passed. But if they do get it passed, well, we might actually get decentralization of mining this time. But I think this time a lot of it's going to move to Latin America. It'd be awesome if like El Salvador, the little country of El Salvador, has like 45% of all the mining in the world. That would be pretty cool. So I don't think Texas would let them. And again, if that happens, if it happened tomorrow, I don't know. But if it happens in 3 to 4 years from now, after one more halving, this could be a reason for Texas to just say no. It's not going to happen. And they would say, well, we'd secede if that is to happen, because it's literally like 10% of the state's employment.
Yeah. And no, absolutely, I completely agree with that. And what do you guys think about that? What do you guys think about the proposed 30% tax on the Bitcoin mining industry?
Yeah, it'd be pretty devastating to mining in
the U.S.
Let me reframe that question.
Yeah.
Do you believe that it is truly for environmental reasons?
No. I mean, if you were Superman, would you walk around with a kryptonite spear and hand it to people? Like,
They're looking for ways to protect themselves against the vulnerability that is Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin is their vulnerability. The idea of money they can't control, money they can't print, represents the antithesis of what our current government, what our current Fed is. Like, it's contrary to their existence. So anything they do right now that would harm it is, whether directly, indirectly, consciously, subconsciously, an attempt to prevent it from excelling. Different people will use different languages, but government is an emergent system just like economies. They've got different participants in different regions. Not everyone's as aware of what they're trying to do, but yeah, I don't think it's explicitly about environment. To what Tone said, yeah, some of it's someone thinking it's going to help the environment or reduce the impact on the environment, but they're also probably drastically misinformed. So yeah, it's a mixed bag there.
What about you, Alan?
You know what? I can't agree more with both of these guys. If it was about the environment, they'd be going after cruise ships. But no, they're going after something that can honestly change the world. And it made sense to him. I mean, just to print fiat, you know how much they have to do environmentally to make that happen? Ultimately, they're going after something that they think they could take down here, and it won't work that way. All they're doing is making the U.S. take a step back in what the whole world will eventually use, because they have to, right? The U.S. dollar is taking a hit, and they need to do something about it to avoid that long-term problem. So when they bring up the environment, it's just a reason to ultimately say, hey, look, I want people on the left here to see this. And what happens is people on the right go, oh, well, then that's my side because it's the left's problem. And that just creates more division. So environment is just one of the reasons why people say it's a problem. And again, shout out to Dennis Porter, Texas Blockchain Council, Satoshi Action Fund, all the councils that I've talked to. They've said it straight. They've told me right from the get-go that mining and Bitcoin as a whole does more for the world and uses so little power compared to what other industries do that it just doesn't make sense at all to be going after it from that front.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. You really hit the nail on the head, right? Which is this idea that it's a double standard. Like, why is this tax only being proposed towards the mining industry and not gold mining and not all these other, energy-intensive industries? Why is it mining specifically that's being focused on, right? So I don't know. I kind of believe that's the smoking gun, really. But back to you, Matt. So Luxor accounts for roughly 7 to 8% of the hash rate, right? Does it worry at all that we might reach a point where the government asks you guys to censor certain types of Bitcoin transactions?
I mean, pool centralization is absolutely a threat vector in this industry. Like, that's one of the first ones that I suspected. The common retort to pool centralization as a threat vector is like, oh, well, it's super easy to switch your hash rate to a pool that's not maybe monitoring OFAC compliant transactions, right? It's a lot easier said than done to switch pools. Like, yes, it's a couple commands and it can happen, but like, we're getting to the point where there's large agreements between pools and operators to where like it may not be so easy for large percentages of the hash rate to penalize pools for doing such a thing. So I think holding pools accountable and making sure that we are vigilant is actually super critical. Stratum v2 is a big topic in this space, so it's definitely something that we're aware of. It's challenging for us because while we agree that the technical principles put forth in SV2 are good and better for Bitcoin in general, it's also not something that there's a ton of clients that are begging for Stratum v2 because they want to propose transactions that they can't do right now. Most people want to turn their machines on and keep rolling. So getting that to widespread adoption across the industry is something that will take some time, I suppose. But yeah, it's definitely something for everyone to be mindful of, to be looking for, to make sure that Bitcoin does stay censorship resistant.
So maybe this is a hard question, but have you guys been asked to censor certain transactions?
I have no idea. I don't believe so. I mean, I don't believe so, but I have no idea.
Gotcha. So I want to focus back on Stratum V2, and I know Tone, you've been pushing this for a while, so maybe you can explain to everybody what is Stratum V2 and what makes it so significant.
All right, so you're putting the only non-miner speaker on the spot.
Yeah, but dude, you've been talking
That's
about
amazing.
this for a while conceptually, all right, man? Maybe not from a technical standpoint.
Conceptually, it's fairly simple. This is where the individual miner inside a pool that finds a block gets to decide what kind of transactions would go into that block instead of the pool deciding what kind of transactions go into that block. Did I get that right?
Sounds right to me.
Just checking. Just checking with the miners at the panel. And I think that it is going to happen. And the moment OPEC compliant blocks actually become a problem in Bitcoin, the community, the meme creators, the Bitcoiners, those that are actually using Bitcoin, will force the miners to do it. Not sure how yet, but no different than we were ready to challenge the miners during the block size war because most of the miners were not on board with SegWit. And the miners eventually did what the users wanted to do, and the users will push it. And I always did think that it wasn't that difficult to switch the hash rate. I know some are going to be a little reluctant. I think they will. I think there will be enough of a push to get all the miners in the pools to do it. And also the miners will just change jurisdiction. Like, the US doesn't control it. I mean, just because a mining pool is domiciled in the US, it doesn't have to stay that way. And I think that's going to be the future for many companies. There's no real reason why Apple has to continue to be domiciled in the US. If the US environment doesn't become good for Apple, they will domicile somewhere else. And thanks to Bitcoin and no future need for banking, most companies will just be virtual. They will not have a domicile. I think that's the ultimate future.
Got you. Alan, any thoughts on Stratum V2 and the significance of it?
To be honest, I haven't really peered too much into that world. I've kept it simple, I think. For me, I grew up with a simple Bitcoin world, and that's where I want to keep it. I don't know where it's going to go, but to many, it's making sense. You know, the way people have explained it to me, I'm not too sure. I'd really like the way things are going right now, so that's all I can really say on that side. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's change it up a little bit. We had some crazy, crazy news in the last couple of weeks, right? We had BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, announce that they are basically launching a Bitcoin spot ETF. And what I've noticed on the legacy corporate media is the change in tune of the anchors, right? They went from kind of attacking Bitcoin to the point where I've seen them, the videos go viral on Twitter. Some of these anchors actually defending Bitcoin tooth and nail. Do you guys believe that might change the social outlook on mining, especially if you have an institution like BlackRock getting it behind it? And maybe there's a question for you, Tone.
I don't. I think the Bitcoin mining space will have to fight the ESG narrative and the demonization of mining for a long time. And the reason is because it's coming from organizations like World Economic Forum, and they're not ready to give up yet. So it's coming from that side. I mean, this ESG push is massive. It's completely misguided. It's completely wrong. The whole climate change is, like, humans are the main culprit of it, is insane. But it's not slowing down. It's, like, actually speeding up. So,
but I guess that's what I'm asking you, Tone, right? So it's like, I agree with you. Like, the Larry Fink and BlackRock were one of the major proponents behind the whole ESG movement. But now you see them in 2018. They said that Bitcoin is like not useful other than for money laundering. Then they changed tone.
What
right?
I think is happening here is a lot of these same anchors that get their orders from the same people. They think that if BlackRock gets in and has the most sought after Bitcoin product, then BlackRock would actually have a say in Bitcoin's future and development, and eventually alter it to something like eco-friendly proof of stake. Now, they are completely wrong on what BlackRock can do, even if they get in, but they don't know that. So I think the reason why they're all so happy that BlackRock is getting in is because now the responsible people in the room are gonna get to dictate some of the terms. And they're gonna find out that BlackRock will be able to do nothing.
Is there not a little more room for nuance to that scenario, though? Like, so I understand proof of work does not lend control to the holder of the most coins. However, just to play the game theory out, right? If BlackRock were to accumulate enough coins to try to motivate a shift to proof of stake, such that they have enough coins that they'd have control over the network, or enough control over the network after a fork, and if they were to try to do that, that would be a threat to Bitcoin mining, right? And I don't know that it's feasible for them to accumulate all that Bitcoin, because by the time they do it, I think we'd all be pretty stinking rich. Like, to try and accumulate that much Bitcoin to make that big of a shift, that's a lot of buying pressure, right? But what would concern me is actually, like, even if they can't make that happen, because that would be really hard, do they settle for, like, green coins? There's a lot of people who think that's, like, a good idea, but, like, oh, if this was mined with renewable energy or whatever, that's the kind of thing that I think is like a kind of gray area of, like, they can, like, kind of attack Bitcoin mining in a certain way that's not an overt attack, but it's a sneaky way to invalidate it. Would any of y'all?
I mean, I go ahead, Tom.
So if BlackRock starts accumulating the biggest Bitcoin retail products, they will be pretty profitable as the industry grows. And then I can see them providing subsidies to miners and trying to create a mining farm as a next project, and perhaps try to monopolize that industry if they can. So there are avenues. I mean, it is one of the richest companies in the world, buying up all the land. Like, what happens when BlackRock comes in and buys the land that the big Bitcoin farm is sitting on? And now they can dictate some terms to the miner. It would be a very long-term play, very long-term. And I mean, it's possible, but it's still going to be, the odds of it are low. But this is one of the reasons why I think the media and the traditional environment is warming up to this idea of Bitcoin, because BlackRock will, they'll work together on behalf to try and alter some of Bitcoin, to lower some of Bitcoin's freedoms, because BlackRock will be involved.
Alan?
I want to agree with both of you, but I think it's a double-edged sword. It's good and it's bad. More people will get in simply, easily, with the way they've always done it, but the whole point of Bitcoin was to own it, have your own seed. We've seen what happens with the exchanges when they don't manage it correctly. I lost a lot of money there. I've learned my lesson, but sadly many others won't have time to learn theirs, and they'll get so comfortable that they'll start buying from there and never truly hold the money that ultimately it's just meant to be yours. It's meant to be a peer-to-peer system. No one in the center there just holding it up like a troll under a bridge. So with that being said, BlackRock just owns way too much, and now to get into this space makes it even scarier, especially as we know where it's going to go. And then what you just mentioned about it, them possibly getting into mining, now we don't know exactly what they're doing, how they're gobbling up a bunch of farms. Right now would be a great time for them to jump in, as a lot of these stressed farms are really still feeling it. So to me, BlackRock getting in is both and both. It'll help people, but I hope people just get comfortable with it, not just use it as its whole source for getting Bitcoin in their portfolio.
Oh, one last quick comment. Like, to me, this transition is not that different than what Bill Gates is doing with farmland. Like, farms are under attack. Like, the elites don't want us eating cows. And Bill Gates is the biggest farm owner of U.S. land. And BlackRock is the biggest land-owning company. So again, it's a similar kind of attack, because they're working together with the government. Now, maybe one day the government will piss off BlackRock, or BlackRock pisses off the government, and then suddenly the government, politicians, and BlackRock are at odds against each other, and suddenly they become on our side and really fighting for Bitcoin because they're in a fight with the government politicians. So we don't know where it's going, but I think the thought process is similar to what Bill Gates is doing with the farms.
Yeah, so we've talked about the multiple attack vectors, and I really want to give them credit and go through all of them today. And a really famous one is they contracted this famous artist, and he made this art piece, this green skull with the nuclear the exhaust on the top. And what they did is that they took this skull, this art piece, and they drove it around New York. But what was hilarious is that they drove it around New York in a gas-powered car, which was absolutely hysterical. But it was all to get press, man. So I'm sure you guys saw it. What did you guys think of the green mining death skull that came out?
So it just goes to show exactly what they're saying, right? Like kind of when a nonprofit says, hey, give us your money, we'll give it out to someone and donate it. And it turns out they're keeping 80% and donating 20%, but they're making 10% of that goes to shirts that they give out to other people to promote themselves. It's just lining their pockets. It's just to save themselves and put face out there. But then when people start to criticize it, they go, well, no, see, ultimately we're trying to spread awareness. So what we're doing right now and expending this type of energy is because it's for the greater good. When in reality, it's like, well, you could have done it in a much better way. So that's what I'm seeing. It's just them trying to just be in front of people without really understanding what they're doing because they never actually meant it to be anything.
100%. And I kind of want to double back on that, right? It's this idea of we know how to use energy, and if it's not being used the way that we like it, therefore it's bad. And that's a very, very scary precedent, I think. So, Tone, what did you think about the green skull? Were you a fan of the artwork?
I mean, I thought it was pretty cool. I actually had no idea it was like an anti-Bitcoin piece. I don't know. I didn't pay attention to it all that much, but Bitcoiners loved it, and I think they eventually convinced the artist that Bitcoin mining is not really bad for the environment. And he was really surprised how all the Bitcoiners really, really liked it. I thought it was a cool story for a little while, but I don't know. I just was too busy during that time with other stuff. I didn't pay too much attention to it.
I mean, it just seemed like it backfired, like completely. They spent all this money. They contracted this artist. And then I think it accomplished the exact opposite of what they wanted it to accomplish. I saw some Bitcoiners put it as their profile picture and stuff.
I know, a lot of them did. I don't think it backfired. I mean, like, again, all press is good press. I think the main goal was, well, the artist is known and the piece became very known. And if someone pays you to do an art piece for a specific cause, you do the art piece, everybody loves it, you realize the cause didn't make sense, you're still happy that the art piece got attention.
Matt, what about you? What did you think about the green mining skull of death?
It was laden with hypocrisy and ignorance, but also beautiful in how I don't know that there's a Bitcoiner that didn't think it looked cool, which is like kind of the point of art. Like if you find your inspiration from art, like it worked.
Wait. You said it had hypocrisy in it. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, like the gas vehicle using it to parade it around town, and the ignorance is like the idea that the nuclear stacks on the top are somehow indicative of bad energy when nuclear is literally emissionless. So like the idea that Greenpeace thinks that this energy is bad because nuclear bad is just, again, another just blatant self-contradiction there, right? Like, oh, we need to cut emissions, but here's this energy source that's really abundant and really dense that doesn't involve coal to make solar panels or killing birds to have wind, right? Like, there's a lot of negative externalities, to use that buzzword, right, for any energy source. But to ignore nuclear because nuclear, like when you put it all together, there's a lot of hypocrisy and ignorance there.
100%. So the green skull of death was my personal favorite, became a meme. And then another attack was the infamous Change the Code. And Change the Code was this marketing scheme that was funded by one of the co-founders of Ripple. He spent $5 million trying to push this marketing campaign, basically to force Bitcoin to change the code. Now, here's the thing. This is the scary part. He could just fork it. Like, he could just totally fork it and change the code, and then, the market could decide which fork they want to go with. But I think it's a little bit more insidious than that. I think it's like force people to use the code that he wants, not the code that people want, which is kind of, it's very interesting. So, Tone, what did you think about that social attack on Bitcoin, the Change the Code campaign, which, by the way, I think it's been an absolute failure. I think they get ratioed on every tweet.
Yeah, no, I wish they would have spent more money. Man, like if Roger Ver couldn't do it with so much on board when they tried to do Bitcoin Cash, and man, it's a crazy effort. Of course, it came from Ripple. Ripple's been in the news a lot lately. And yeah, it can't work. It won't work because it's coming from an industry, and that's what the same thing with BlackRock. If BlackRock proposes something, because it's BlackRock, it's going to get shut down and ratioed, and it's not going to go anywhere. And this is why I'm confident they will not be able to change the code either.
Could you explain that?
It wasn't much of a question, so just a general comment on it.
Yeah, but could you explain that, how things will get shut down if they come from a corporation? Like, why is that?
Bitcoiners don't trust them. A lot of pure Bitcoiners don't trust the big corporations, and the biggest Bitcoin holders are still early Bitcoin adopters that stuck with Bitcoin. A lot of them were the early Bitcoin developers, because those were the guys that were most interested in it. So the majority of the Bitcoin, and still people with good resources, are Bitcoiners, and they're not going to let some old school corporation or someone with old thinking alter the future of Bitcoin.
Gotcha. Alan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Tom said it best. If a fork would have worked, where's Bitcoin Cash? If a fork would have worked, where's Bitcoin Satoshi's vision? Ultimately, like he said, everybody knows that Bitcoin is the one to beat. And when other companies try to come in and try to change it, the market will choose. Just when we were talking earlier about where the miners want to be. They know where they want to go, and it makes sense to them. A fork just isn't what's right, because what stood the test of these last 13 so years is the original Bitcoin algorithm. And that's what ultimately will stand the test of time. When you said when a big company comes in, that really hit home. Because, when I first started in this industry about a year and a half ago, nobody trusted me. I had to do my due diligence of making sure that I connected with the right people, talked to the right people, did business correctly, and then that's when the Bitcoiners of the world will trust you to make sure that you have a long-tailed, purposefully meant business model. And when someone like a Ripple or someone like a BlackRock comes in, maybe others have to see that you're doing the right thing before they go, okay, maybe there's something there, or else you'll get ratioed. Simple as that.
What about you, Matt? What do you think?
I mean, it's either like just drastically misguided, like they don't understand the audience that might be receiving that message, like change the code, like, or
they keep using the environment, right? It's change the code. Let's change the code. Let's move away from a proof of work algorithm. Mm-hmm. Let's move it to a quote unquote environmentally friendly algorithm.
Sure, I think Ripple is just missing the audience, right? Like the people who have invested in Bitcoin, stayed in Bitcoin, are in the mining
space. Are they
space.
missing the audience, or are they doing it on purpose?
I think the point is they're trying to convince people that it's a good idea to change the code, and they don't understand that the people they're talking to, who might have the either influence or capacity to change the code, have bought into Bitcoin because they believe that separating the introduction of monetary units to an economy from doing work is a bad idea. Those are the people they're trying to convince. So they're trying to convince people to change their mind on this thing that's at the very core of Bitcoin and how it works. Like, you have to do work to introduce monetary units. That's how we don't get inflation, because when you don't have to do work, someone's got a printer. And when someone's got a printer, we get too much money. And we get too much money, we get inflation. You go down that rabbit hole, right? So the people they're trying to convince, are philosophically aligned. So really, they're either trying to convince them, that's why I think it's misguided, they've totally missed their audience, or they're trying to convince people who are less informed just to kind of make noise in a space that they're not really going to influence, or they're going to try to. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know really what they're thinking, unless it's just to make noise.
I would agree with that last part. I really believe that they're not so much aiming for Bitcoiners that are already convinced what Bitcoin is. I really think that they're trying to gather enough political willpower to, in their eyes, potentially pass legislation. And I think in some states they're actually they were successful, right? In New York State, they passed the mining ban moratorium, right? That you can't, they're not a fan of Bitcoin mining in New York State apparently. So Tone, you're from New York. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's crazy, which is why there's not going to be any Bitcoin mines in New York. They could have been. New York has pretty good power grid. They have a lot of electricity coming from the dams. And New York could have greatly benefited from the mining industry, but the people that run New York seem to be completely misguided, and they put in this ban on mining. And New York's just hurting itself. So we'll see where that goes.
Would it be safe to say that New York's going to have fun staying poor?
Yeah, well, the financial industry is still there, so they're not going to be that poor. But a lot more people driving around New York with the Florida license plates. I'll tell you that much right now.
Alan, what's your take on this, brother?
When all news comes, I do what I do, and I go to every connection I have. I go on Telegram, jump on, what do you think about this? And I happen to have a lot of friends in New York, and they told me the same thing. It's like, man, I love it here, but why do you got to go and do that? There's so much going for Bitcoin mining, and you're seeing those that do accept it flourish. And, there's some adapting to it, but I wish they gave it a chance to breathe, have some real opportunity, because those people that were mining in New York were actually creating jobs. New York is already a tough enough place, like LA, to survive. You need to be making over $80,000, sometimes $100,000 just to survive comfortably. And when a Bitcoin mining job comes there, you can almost bet that you're going to be paid well. So when you start attacking these businesses, and New York starts doing it, they're really kind of keeping themselves from potential that could have been more jobs, more revenue, and a potential of a growth of an industry that will be here to stay. So that's what I think.
Matt, what about you? What's your take?
Vote with your feet. That's the beauty of a federalist nation. Like, we've got jurisdictions that do stupid things. Get out. You've seen it happen in California. Tone's alluding to it happen in New York. Like, get out.
100%. And I think, and we saw that, right? We saw that with China and the miners moving to Texas, the great state of Texas. So the way that I see it, guys, is that grid mining is obviously open to, I think it's prone to regulatory hostility. And I think I'm a big fan of off-the-grid mining, right? These miners, is amazing mining companies, I'm friends with a lot of them, right, have built entire businesses off using flared gas to mine Bitcoin in the oil fields, right? Completely off the grid. You have no idea it's there unless you look. And of course, the fallback, the triarii, so to speak, the home miners, which I'm a big fan of as well. So I want to get your guys' take on that. Is the future of mining off grid? Do you believe it's still going to be very grid dependent? What are you guys' thoughts on that? The reason I ask is because I think off the grid mining and home mining is, how are they going to know that what you're doing at home, right?
I think it depends on the general direction with respect to ESG. Do administrations continue to push policies that incentivize unreliable power like wind and solar? If that's the case, grids are going to depend on Bitcoin mining more and more and more, because the less reliable your generation, the more generation you need. There's no one in this room that's not aware of like the demand response curtailment stuff going on, right? So like that's really essential for grids that have huge percentages of wind and solar. I live in Texas. I went through the freeze in 2019 or 2019. Like I'm aware of what wind and solar can do to the reliability of your power. Off-grid, I think, has a huge part to play, but for the same reason the administrations are pushing the ESG narrative that kind of increases dependence on wind and solar.
You may also have the same kind of initiatives that are discouraging natural gas in general. So like there's some really interesting things that can play out in the future and how they go will determine how much it's there, but it's really hard to do off-grid mining.
Like, I worked in oil and gas for a while. Like, running an oil well is already tough enough. Adding an entirely new industry to that operation just to keep power running consistently, ASICs running, all that stuff, it's not easy. So there's a lot of gas in a lot of places in the world, and they have a lot of power because of that. But connecting the two is really the next challenge. So it could be a big player. It should be. But we'll never know.
We shall see.
Yeah, we will.
So, Alan, have you seen any off-grid miners buying some ASICs recently?
I see all sorts of miners, but you know who really strike me, and I hear all the stories, father and sons getting into it. It's like the new car, like, you know, you bring a crappy car and you go fix it up with your dad. I've heard one interesting story, and I've got to know them pretty well. If they're out there, they'll know. They just like to keep it a secret. But they ran their home with 4 or 5 ASICs, and they heated it over the summer. And then they did it to their grandparents' house. I mean, over the winter, sorry. And then they did it to the grandparents' house, and then they did it to their friend's house, and then they opened up a coffee shop, and then they put some miners in there, and then they did it to a friend's place, and it's very interesting. They're like, now have about 25, 30 miners. Not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but I think that's what will ultimately make sense to a lot of people. I can either go out to an exchange, purchase it, or I can just make this clean Bitcoin for myself, go straight to my wallet, and keep my place warm when it makes sense. And that's what I want to see. Now, who gets a hold of this? I hope it's the father and sons, the daughters and the fathers, the moms and the kids. I want a family to get into this because I think that's what really makes sense to everybody. If you just realize how simple it is to plug in, connect, and start making use of that energy in your own business and home.
So do they get to keep the Bitcoin mining fees when they put up a couple of miners in a friend's place as a heater?
You know, I actually asked them if they charged them for that. They're just like, well, we'll just charge you for, like, there's a setup, but you get to keep the rest. They just help them out with everything else. No, it's an incredible story, man. I love it.
All right, so I'm going to put Tone on the spot. Tone, you're an OG. You've been here a long time.
I had a couple of miners running up on my cabin in Pennsylvania. They were just too noisy, and I just didn't have the ampage, and I was just pissing off the family. But, yeah. But BTC Sessions did a video the other day. Like, what a lot of people are doing is, as a hobby miner, exactly what you're just saying, is they replaced the fans with very like silent fans. But when you do that, the fans aren't as powerful. So you have to run that miner at like maybe 50, 60% of its like capacity so that it doesn't overheat. But now it's being quiet, but it still releases heat. And this is what people are using to heat their homes, heat their like water heaters. There is a sauna place in New York that's somehow doing it on mining, which is weird because of the mining ban. So I'm not really sure how they're doing it, but they're heating it with Bitcoin miners. So I do think that the future, the ultimate future, if we're going 20, 30 years down the road, maybe a little bit more than that, I do think that mining will be fully decentralized and in people's homes. I don't think these big mining operations are going to be profitable in 30, 40 years. I do think, I could be wrong, but I think once the Bitcoin mining subsidy goes away, yes, there will be some fees. But if a lot of people are using the Lightning Network, I don't think the industry is going to keep expanding. And at that point, Bitcoin will become more decentralized because Bitcoin will be so important to everyone that everyone's going to want to run at least 1 or 2 miners. So I can definitely see 1 billion people on this planet running a miner at home. That's 1 billion miners. Everyone's just running one. And then the companies that require Bitcoin in order to have a company in existence, even a company like Coinbase, for example, like if Bitcoin didn't exist, I mean, they are a shitcoin company, but like maybe a different company that only focuses on Bitcoin. And by then, I don't think there'll be any shitcoins. So that company will run a mining operation in order to keep their company alive, because if Bitcoin doesn't exist, their company doesn't exist. So I can certainly see the majority of the people running miners at a loss. So mining itself will not be its own industry. So in the ultimate future, that's what I see, just miners in everyone's homes.
Sounds beautiful to me, man. I'm going to pass it back to you, Tone. Tone, back to what I was saying.
Yeah.
You're an OG. You've been here a while. How were the social attacks in the beginning compared to now? Have they escalated? Have they increased? And why do you believe that is?
So I think they have increased because now they're coming from state actors. Now they're coming from the government, where before the government were just laughing at us, and most of the attacks were coming from, well, shitcoiners that wanted to take Bitcoin down so that their coin would succeed. It's a similar strategy to like Survivor, where you're supposed to vote off the weakest link. But when you come down to like the final 10 people, you really want to band together and vote off the strongest link, because otherwise he's going to win. So it's a similar strategy. So all of the stuff was coming from people in the crypto space that hated Bitcoin. Now, the stakes are way higher. Now, there are way bigger problems for every single government to deal with than Bitcoin. So I don't understand why it's so important. I thought it was insane how the US Congress had a bill, an anti-El Salvador bill, because most of the politicians don't even know where El Salvador is. And somehow this little country, like the Senate was discussing it, and we're going to like have some kind of a bill against El Salvador. I don't remember what it was because it was so stupid. So it's coming from, decision makers. So it is a little bit tougher and scarier because they still have all the guns, most of the guns at least, and they can still come and arrest you if they don't like what you're doing. So it's not great, but Bitcoin it's not going to go down. Not for this.
Yeah, so it's safe to say we're definitely in the then they fight you stage. So I don't know, gentlemen, if you have any comments on what Tone was saying.
It always feels like you're at a fighting stage with Bitcoin. No matter how good we do, no matter what lives we change, there will always be the other narrative of it's either anti-American or it's anti-world government or it's whatever it is, right? People want to feel safe, or they're going after your pensions, or why would I want to go to that when I've been putting my money here? Ultimately, Bitcoin will always be attacked. From where, it's always changing. But I think as people stick to Bitcoin, and every bear market really makes a stronger Bitcoin maximalist, I guess you'd call it, because they stick to it. And this is my second bear market, and I've never been a stronger advocate for Bitcoin. So I feel like it's kind of a way to get into this industry is you have to deal with the bad to understand the good. And more people will just continue to use it. And I think it's just a matter of time. But I'm just so used to it at this point, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's important in the context of like understanding the attacks that are coming to look to history, honestly, because like if you look back to the last time we had a hard money, how did the government stop that? Well, they started a misinformation campaign to suggest that people were hoarding gold and they were the reason that the economy was so terrible. And like the playbook's kind of written already in certain contexts. So like there will be more social attacks because a hard money represents a threat to politicians who live and die by a soft money, right? Like that is what is required to perpetuate a budget that's really irresponsible. So like they're going to pull out every trick they can to attack it, whether it's environmental FUD, whether it's transactions to sanctioned entities FUD, you name it. You should expect it in the coming decade, right?
Absolutely. So. But I want to end it with a call to action, right? So I'm going to ask you guys, what could individuals, specifically individual miners, what can they do? What do you believe they can do to protect themselves against these attacks, or metaphorically fight back, right? And I love the example about the New York Times, right? Because that was, in my opinion, what all of this represents is narrative trench warfare. You're really trying to win over the hearts of minds of individuals, right? And what I love about the New York Times hit piece was the Bitcoin community came together, right? They fought back. Pierre Richard released that video. The New York Times struck back. They tried to community note it. The Bitcoin community struck back, and they've got that community note removed, right? So if you guys were to give advice to the audience and anyone listening to this, what would you say? What would your recommendation be?
don't get stuck in echo chambers, engage with normies, like have conversations with random people at bars, don't keep being the weird guy talking about Bitcoin too much. Like that's the kind of thing that prevents that person, that one person you encounter from maybe agreeing with something dumb that Brad Sherman says, right? Like, and maybe that stops Brad Sherman from getting elected next election. The more people we bring into the fold, the more people we educate on sound money and why we need to expend all of this energy to secure the network, like the easier it is for us to have a solid foundation of people who want this thing to succeed.
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's not left versus right. I think that's the divide and conquer strategy. It's not red versus blue. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It is the party of green, which is the party of central bank digital currencies, fiat, nihilism, slavery, versus the party of orange, which is the party of freedom, Bitcoin, prosperity, and optimism, really. So I really do believe that that's the message that we have to propagate. That's the message that we have to hammer home repeatedly. So Alan, if you were to give advice, to your family, to your friends, to people listening in the audience, what would it be? What advice would you give them to help push this peaceful Bitcoin revolution forward?
Thanksgiving dinner will never be the same ever since I got all my family members into Bitcoin and it crashed. And what I learned from that was, look, all I can do is use it, promote it on whatever I can, social media, or just talk around it. I no longer tell people to buy or mind. I let them come to the decision. Ultimately, it's education, because when I'm out here, people come to me and say, Alan, tell me a little bit, and I just sprinkle a little bit. I don't scare them. I tell them, do your own research. Understand the money you're using today, why the savings no longer make sense. Why is the government printing money? Where does that money go, and how can Bitcoin fix that? And then you'll come to the same realization we all do eventually, and that's why Bitcoin makes sense. So education and just a simple sprinkling of information through time. I think that's it.
Beautiful. What about you, Tone?
Yeah, that was well said, so I completely agree. Now, the original question was, what can miners do? I think every single mining company should have either some kind of YouTube channel or a publication just on education, or funding research, like what had to be started with Michael Saylor. Just doing research. I mean, that's what the oil industry was doing, publishing research. Same thing here. Just like the internet should be flooded with research from people that actually care about mining. And then it would be really hard to write these hit pieces when so much fact-checked research is just already out there for free and available. So I think that's one of the things that mining companies can do.
I mean, but but to go back to your point, Tone, one of Naim Bukele's pieces, right, like don't drink the elite's Kool-Aid, and it really resonated with me because he said all the quiet part out loud, right? He said, they control the mediums, the information mediums, they control the narrative, they control the networks.
So how can mining companies overcome that?
Sponsor meetups.
Yeah, again, just community outreach, just having it more out there and available. I know they somewhat control Google, but not everything. You can still find stuff. Yeah, more easily available research should be out there. Like, just the next time when Porter was here on stage and he said he was at some government meeting, and some of the government staffers thought that Bitcoin mining was 20% of the world's energy use, when in reality it's less than 1%, and a lot less than 1%. And this should be very easy to Google, but it's not. So that's what I mean. Like more, if the internet is flooded with the research, it becomes a lot harder for people to have these ridiculous ideas that they think are facts.
I mean, that's one of the narratives, right? The narratives is Bitcoin uses more energy than the country of Denmark, which is like, there's nuance there, right? There's nuance. It's not talking about what energy, what energy is being used, right? Obviously, it's using stranded or isolated energy, or else it wouldn't be economical to use. But those punchlines, those narratives are so strong. Like
but I like that question. Like if someone ever says that to me, I would say, well, the world needs Bitcoin a lot more than they need Denmark. Let's get rid of Denmark. Why are they using any energy?
Or just answer, and like, so what? Like, there's more space heater usage in the country of Denmark in Canada. Like, why does it matter how much energy is spent?
The dryers are a good example. We dry our clothes, and that uses more energy. My favorite example is video games. I would love for someone to give me, a global, like, important use for video games, and energy for video games is way more than energy for Bitcoin. So many of these good counterexamples.
All right, so I'm going to ask the audience, and please scream and please speak up. B is for Bitcoin, and F is for what? I'm going to say freedom. Tone?
Freedom sounds good.
Alan?
Oh, definitely freedom.
Freedom.
Awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much. My name is Nico Moran. This is Tone, Alan, and Matt. Appreciate you all.
Thank you.